Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. Senator Putnam is presenting Senate File 15. Today, we had the explanation for it on Thursday, and today we're going to have testimony both on the Social Security portion and the second part of it, which is the pension portions. I'm going to ask people to testify first, and then we'll lay the bill over, but we'll also leave room for members to ask questions, but not during the testimony, only afterwards, if anybody objects to that. Just trying to be efficient and allow the testifiers to have as much time as possible, but of course, we certainly can ask questions. I want to thank Senator Drazkowski for sending over that document regarding Social Security. Is very helpful. Appreciate it. And I believe you sent it or it was moved on to all members. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So we'll begin with welcoming Senator Putnam. Did you want to make any initial comments before I call forth that sounds so formal, before I ask the testifiers to come forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I would like to say just a couple things quite briefly, and the first of which is that I'd intended to do the customary thanks of all the individuals who have helped us come up to speed on this issue in our last session, but I didn't take the opportunity to do that. So I do want to make sure to thank Ms. Pollack and Senate Council and all the people who've been meeting with me for the last 2 weeks to help us unravel what is a very complicated and tricky concern. But in addition to the complications of this policy, I do hope that we also keep our mind on the people that it affects. And that's why I'm especially grateful that we have an opportunity to talk to some of those people today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. I'll call, I will ask Senator Putnam to remain at the witness table, and those that are testifying to come up, and I'll call you up in pairs, and then you can give your testimony. Senator Putnam, if any time you want to take a chair in the audience while people are testifying, that's perfectly okay as well. So first of all is Nan Madden and Roland Martinson. And we do have a time limit. I'm sure that Ms. Madden is familiar with that. Mr. Berggren has a timer for us. So welcome to the committee. Ms. Madden, if you'd identify yourself, please, for the record.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Nan Madden. I'm director of the Minnesota Budget Project. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today with concerns about Senate File 15 and the other bills that would replace our state's current targeted approach to Social Security taxation with a blanket exemption for all income levels. And I'll just speak to the Social Security portion of the bill. We all value the contributions that Minnesota seniors make to our state, and we're all concerned about the challenges that some Minnesota seniors are facing. But this bill is not targeted only to those who are struggling. And the large and growing cost of the proposed tax cuts would make it harder to ensure that all Minnesota seniors are secure and thriving in their communities. Our kids and young people get the strongest start in life, and our families and communities are strong. Full Social Security exemption would cost nearly $1.3 billion in the 24-25 biennium and $1.5 billion in 26-27. And to put that into perspective, that full Social Security exemption would use nearly 18% of the projected structural balance in 26-27. And the amount of lost revenues would grow further over time, along with the growing number of seniors. Minnesota seniors count on public services like community-based care that allow them to stay in their homes, transit to get to shopping or the doctor, or high-quality nursing home care. The most struggling seniors would be hardest hit if we fail to invest in needed services today, and they would feel the greatest harm from cutbacks in services in response to future deficits. When we next hit tough times, I question whether in hindsight we would think that spending billions of dollars on this particular tax cut was the best use of today's surplus dollars. My second concern is that this bill is not focused solely on those facing financial struggles. Instead, the highest income households are both more likely to benefit and to get the biggest tax cuts. Minnesota already takes a responsible approach to Social Security benefits. About 2/3 of Social Security income going to Minnesota residents is already exempt from income taxes. That's because on top of federal exemptions, Minnesota has an additional Social Security subtraction for households with provisional incomes up to $110,000 for married filers and about $86,000 for single and head of household filers. In contrast to this targeted approach, under this bill, half of the Social Security tax cuts would go to households with adjusted gross income over $125,000. Households with adjusted gross incomes over $250,000 would receive annual tax cuts more than $2,700 simply because Social Security is among their sources of income. That's a much larger tax cut than what more modest income seniors would receive if they get a tax cut at all. It simply is not necessary or effective to provide permanent tax cuts to the wealthiest in order to help those folks currently facing financial struggles. Members of the committee, I ask you to please continue Minnesota's targeted approach to Social Security taxation, which also takes into account the need to sustainably fund public services that Minnesota seniors, as well as their children, grandchildren, and neighbors count on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Madden. Mr. Martinson, welcome to the committee, if you would identify yourself for the record.
I'm Roland Martinson, a retired dean and professor who in retirement mostly lives on Social Security and a pension, generated during a lifetime on a middle-class salary. Good morning, Chair Rest and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you regarding reducing or eliminating taxes on Social Security. I come today to speak against the reduction or elimination of taxes on Social Security benefits. Sherry, my wife, and I have lived in Minnesota for 45 years. We've raised 4 children here. 3 of them and their spouses live here now, as do 8 of our 9 grandchildren. Minnesota and the Twin Cities have been sturdy, lively places to raise our children and watch our grandchildren thrive. This is a good and generative place to live and live well with a promising future. We've experienced educational excellence, among the best in the country, wonderful accessible parks, excellent nature reserves, fine libraries, refined senior centers. I could go on. Minnesota's and the Twin Cities people and their lifestyles are built on strong civic commitments, social responsibility, and the common good. All this requires time and imagination, and it costs money. I want, in my years as an elder, to contribute to government leadership to maintain and grow this gracious, sturdy place. As a middle-class retiree, I can afford to pay taxes on Sherry's and my Social Security and pension. I want to continue to provide the civic goodness, sturdiness, and beauty in the future for my grandchildren and others, what those in the past have provided me. I like the Minnesota I live in, and I know that in part it is made possible through the taxes I pay with a happy heart, knowing that it will benefit all Minnesotans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinson. Next, Eric Bernstein and Mary Jo George.
Eric said he didn't need to testify on that, so he can cross him off there.
Good morning, Mr. Bernstein, and identify yourself for the record, please.
Chair Rest and members of the Tax Committee, my name is Eric Bernstein, and I am Policy Director of a labor grassroots coalition called We Make Minnesota. Thank you for having me here today to testify on Senate File 15. Our coalition includes Minnesota's teachers, long-term care workers, laborers, child care workers, and nurses, as well as communities of faith and rural communities throughout the state. Our members are united in recognition of the essential role that our state budget plays in creating a just and equitable Minnesota for everyone. I'm here today to share our concerns with Senate File 15, which would eliminate state taxes on Social Security benefits. We oppose this policy because it is costly and poorly targeted to help those who need it. Full exemption would cost nearly $1.3 billion over the 24-25 biennium, with the price tag projected to rise in subsequent years. At nearly 20% of the ongoing surplus, SF-15 would greatly impair the state's ability to invest in the hospitals, nursing homes, care workers, and other public services that our growing senior population depends on. It would also benefit the wrong people. Social Security exemption has been widely described as relief for low-income seniors, but in fact, 70% of this cut would go to about 200,000 households making over $100,000 per year. The Social Security Administration reports that there were nearly 1.1 million Social Security recipients in Minnesota in 2021, which suggests that these 200,000 households receiving 70% of the benefit would represent the top 20% of Minnesota retirees. If the goal is to help low-income seniors, 70% to the top 20% is not the right way to do it. These high-income filers would receive an average benefit of more than $2,000 per year or $40 per week, while those making under $100,000 would receive an average tax cut of just $13 per week. Meanwhile, seniors facing the most difficult circumstances would get little or nothing. Under SF-15, filers making under $50,000 per year would save less than $4 per week. But that's only counting those earning enough to benefit at all. This policy would actually exclude more seniors than it helps. Roughly 600,000 recipients pay no taxes on their Social Security benefits and thus would receive nothing at all. There are many seniors in Minnesota who require greater public assistance to live healthy, fulfilling lives. In the fall, I had the chance to visit the Ebenezer Towers in South Minneapolis. It's a lot of HUD vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, which means the income cap's $46,000. Those folks definitely need help. This bill wouldn't do that. We appreciate your attention to the issue, but it's too high of a price to pay as a gesture. Our coalition respectfully asks that we think of a better way to aid these seniors in need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. George.
Yes, good morning. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Mary Jo George, and I'm the Associate State Director of Advocacy with ARP Minnesota. Joining me today by Zoom is our member Peggy Heinstad Harry. And on behalf of our nearly 620,000 members, we would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate File 15 this year. We also want to thank Senator Putnam for bringing this bill forward and the committee's thoughtful discussion on this complex issue last week. ARP has long advocated for Social Security tax relief, and we have appreciated past legislative actions that provided a subtraction up to the new adjusted thresholds for taxing these benefits. However, these changes have not gone far enough, and we believe it is time now to stop taxing these benefits as more retirees are paying these taxes on the benefits. To begin with, let me just start with our perspective on this program. You know, we do consider Social Security an earned benefit, and historically it was always designed as an anti-poverty program and not necessarily a way to fund state government. This is an issue our members care deeply about and one that they've been very vocal about. They believe it is a benefit that they have earned and have paid into the program over a lifetime of work. As you know, and as you heard last week, prior to 1984, these benefits weren't taxable. And today, Minnesota is one of only 12 states that tax Social Security benefits. Of course, taxation of Social Security benefits at the federal level and the state level are different in one critical regard, and that is the federal taxes directly support the trust fund that pays for these benefits. When ARP recently analyzed the growth in the numbers and amounts of federally taxable Social Security between 1997 through 2020, the earliest and the latest years that were available by income, we found that while the total number of Minnesota returns grew by 29%, the number of returns with taxable Social Security increased over 3 times to 312%. Now, I want to be really clear that this doesn't mean everyone is paying taxes because of what you've heard in terms of the exemption and the subtraction. But what our research indicates is that the main culprit is the failure of the federal formula to adjust for this inflation. The problem becomes far more acute at times of high inflation. High inflation will push more recipients into paying taxes on their Social Security benefits. As a result, These taxes will eat away at the recent Social Security increase and leave them vulnerable to the cost of living increases from record high inflation. So we believe exempting these benefits from taxation will provide additional security for older Minnesotans and go a long way in helping seniors who are feeling the pressure of rising health and long-term care costs, along with higher food, utility, and property tax concerns. And in a moment, you'll hear from Peggy, who will share her concerns. Finally, we want to acknowledge the concern around the budget impact of eliminating this tax. You know, as you all know, for the last several years, this has been a concern for us, and that's why we have used a balanced approach. But this year, I think, given the historic surplus and what we saw last year in terms of the surplus, I think it allows us to at least consider eliminating this tax and keep Minnesota in line with other states. In conclusion, we want to thank you again for the opportunity to testify. And, while we understand many people have differing views, we're hopeful that we can work together this session to move the issue forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. George. And on the Zoom is Ms. Peggy Heistan Harris. Is that correct?
Harry.
Good morning. If you'd identify yourself, please, for the record, we'd welcome your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Peggy Heaston Harry from Hermantown, Minnesota. I'm here today to speak in favor of Social Security tax relief as a senior citizen, a retired professional, a new widow, and a volunteer for several volunteer organizations, which include AARP, Senior Linkage, and the Alzheimer's Association, all in which I work with seniors. Minnesota, with a large budget surplus, continues to be one of the 11 states with tax on Social Security. Pensions are becoming a thing of the past unless a person has years of work with a government agency or union. The states that border Minnesota all do not require seniors to pay Social Security tax. There are also 8 states that do not tax any retirement income, which includes Social Security pensions and IRAs. In my neighborhood, 50% of the residents have a second home in a state that has tax breaks for retirement money. They spend 6 months plus 1 day to have residency and therefore are able to bypass the Minnesota taxes due to their income and assets. Lifestyle choices also impact the financial stability of Minnesota residents. I live frugally, plan for retirement, and saved responsibly. Yet with my current income, I find it hard to continue to save for emergencies. In addition, my health insurance, real estate taxes, and my homeowner's fees total $15,800 a year and increase yearly, which I have no control over. Extra money is put aside for emergency medical costs as I age, but is often needed for home improvements and home maintenance, repairing things. The car I drive is 22 years old. This is where losing a spouse to death and the loss of a second Social Security payment makes saving for long-term care very challenging and times impossible. I cannot afford the payments on a long-term care insurance policy. But yet I consider myself fortunate in many ways. My income consists of Social Security and pensions. My situation is different from many as I have a small state pension and my husband left me as beneficiary of his county pension, and we both had IRAs. However, I find it challenging to keep up with the inflation costs in keeping a home. I own my own home, but the inflation increases are alarming. The cost of living increase in 2022 for my pensions was only 1 to 2%. The COLA amount did not come close to the inflation rate. In searching out a way to lower my expenses, I found that affordable senior housing is hard to find and costly. With the high cost of rent, it would not be cost effective for me to move. When a spouse dies, your taxes increase due to the loss of a deduction, which is also known as a widow's tax. Mine went from 12% to 22%, and your income goes down due to the loss of a second Social Security payment. The reality is every couple will experience losing a spouse at some time, and for some, the financial piece is devastating. The loss of a spouse often becomes the loss of a lifestyle that keeps them healthy, physically, and mentally. I see and hear this with my volunteer work. This testimony was written on January 14th, my 72nd birthday, a time when I will be starting my RMDs that I saved for retirement. It is a gift to me, to myself, to speak out and be heard to help others that are not as fortunate as I have been in life choices, so they can find some peace and joy and hopefully give back to the community in other ways than having another debt to pay. It is for this reason I am appealing you to join the other 39 states and give middle-income seniors a tax break with Social Security income. As an ARP volunteer, this has been asked for since 2013. It is time. Middle-income seniors need a break. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Harry. I'm sorry we misspelled your name. I did give a little bit of extra time to Ms. Harry, combined with the person who was here from ARP itself. Next, we have James Ryan on Zoom. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Ryan. If you'd identify yourself for the record.
Yeah.
Is your mic on?
I believe it is now. Can you confirm that?
Yes, it is. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Tax Committee. My name is James Ryan. Everybody knows of me as Jim, and I'm the Legislative Vice President of NARF's Minnesota Federation and the chapter president here in Minneapolis. Since 1921, NARF has been a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization dedicated to promoting the general welfare of all federal employees, retirees, and their survivors. Many people think they all work in D.C., but there are 60,715 active and retired federal and postal employees here in Minnesota, with 31,912 federal annuitants, 16,936 active federal employees, and 11,870 U.S. Postal Service employees. Minnesota's second largest employer is the United States Postal Service, and the third largest is the Department of Veterans Affairs. I retired from the Social Security Administration after 40 years of service, mostly here in Minnesota, including as a local office district manager. I've remained active in the community with church service, and in retirement, I've been serving on the board and volunteering for a lot of the operations of a small local nonprofit organization. I'm here to address the Social Security as well as the pension portion, because retirement tax relief for government workers is lacking under current Minnesota provisions, which provide for less exemption of retirement income for people who have served their communities as government employees than for other people. Retirement tax relief for government workers who serve the needs of folks throughout Minnesota should be no less than that for any other retirees here. So to provide anything less would be grossly unfair and detrimental to our communities. At the current time, a little over 51% of our members here in Minnesota receive pensions that are excluded from Social Security. So that's why it's important that we consider both aspects of this bill as well as their relationship to each other. And with that, I'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan also has signed up to speak about the pension portion. I'm going to let him go ahead and do that now, as well as the next testifier. And then I'm going to allow some questions from members about the Social Security part of it, and then go on to the other. Mr. Ryan, if you want to testify about the pensions portion,
Okay, I
if
appreciate.
you have anything further to say,
I do have a little bit further to say. Thank
go
you
right
very
ahead.
much. Kind of makes sense to put it all together here, so I appreciate that. Unlike many employees working here in Minnesota, many federal government workers, like myself, have had part of their work careers in other states. 18 states do not have any tax on civil service annuities, and another 5 have an exemption on some social federal annuities. It is apparent that significant numbers of federal employees moved to those states in retirement, so we Minnesotans miss out on their high level of public service and contributions to their communities after their government services ended if they feel comfortable in moving to one of those other states, especially to communities where their service has established roots and connections with such a financial difference for them. Documents distributed to the committee and others explain details for those workers exempt or limited from Social Security as their retirement income. So I look forward to sharing my insight and working with you leaders in ensuring legislation you consider does not disadvantage government employees and retirees. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Next, we have Mr. John Lee, who is also on Zoom, and I understand Mr. Lee wants to comment both on the Social Security part and the pensions part. We do have people who have come in and asked informally to be put on the witness list. We'll see how the time goes, but I will, if we have the time, certainly will ask anyone who is present who also wishes to testify to do so. Mr. Lee, welcome to the committee. If you'd identify yourself, please, for the record. Mr. Lee, are you with us on Zoom? Apparently, getting a little bit of feedback here, apparently not at this time. So if there's anyone who wants to speak about the Social Security part, please come forward and you can have a minute or two. We'll ask for your testimony to be brief. Welcome to the committee. Ma'am, if you would identify yourself, please, for the record, and spell your name for us, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. My name is Joan Beaver. I live in Stillwater, Minnesota, and I'm a member of Education Minnesota Retired.
Welcome to the committee.
As an organization, Education Minnesota Retired does not have a formal position on the proposed bill to eliminate state taxes on Social Security benefits. Speaking personally, my income usually falls below the top threshold of paying Social Security benefits taxes. However, when I begin the required minimum, or I should say I began the required minimum distribution this last year from my IRA, my income will require tax payments on 85% of my Social Security benefits. So naturally, if you offer to eliminate the state taxes on those benefits, my first instinct is to cheer. And anecdotally, I think that most members of Education Minnesota Retired would probably feel the same. With having a pension in addition to Social Security and opportunities to do IRAs while we were working, many of us will fall into that top tier, especially as we start withdrawing from our IRAs. But in spite of welcoming tax relief, especially in light of inflationary prices alongside a 1% cost of living adjustment in TRA benefits, which you've already heard about from other speakers. I have a lot of unanswered questions about the pros and cons of eliminating taxes on Social Security. At the hearing last Tuesday, I heard the bill's author say that the average beneficiary will save $1,000, but a more relevant statistic would tell us what the amount would be at the median. We heard other speakers testify that some people would have a very small benefit from cutting taxes or none at all. That average amount is probably driven up by the higher savings for the top income levels, which you've also heard about. Lots of questions were raised at the hearing of this committee last Tuesday, so I would urge the committee to gather answers before moving forward. I got the sense when I was here last week that the issues were much more complex than I think people first thought when approaching it. As I look more closely at a tax cut that would definitely give me some relief, I have to wonder how that will impact state funding for services that are very important to all Minnesotans. And we heard one of the testifiers talking about the needs for supporting seniors. My husband is currently recovering from a stroke at Regions Hospital, which has brought home to me the critical need for elder care. I am in the process of looking for assisted living for him, which is very expensive and in short supply. We'll be okay. We have long-term care insurance, which does not cover everything. We have savings, but perhaps eventually we'll need assistance from the state. I don't know. And every day that I visit him in the rehabilitation unit, I see so many people who are going to need help when they leave, people of all ages, which is a very visual reminder of the funding needed for health and human services. Like many retirees, I have school-age grandchildren whose education is very important to me. And when the state budget surplus is used up, what impact will a permanent tax cut have on their opportunities? As a 37-year teacher, it's not only my grandchildren that I'm concerned about, but the needs of all Minnesota kids and their future contributions to the quality of life in Minnesota. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beaver. Next, if you would identify yourself, and again, I'm going to ask, these are extra testifiers, so if you would be very brief.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee in this informal way. My name is Leota Goodney, and I live in Northfield, Minnesota. I am 72 years old. I am a retired CPA, and I am a leader with Isaiah. I strongly object to taking Social Security out of taxable income for Minnesota income tax. This is mainly a tax cut for higher income people in our state, not for seniors who are struggling or barely getting by. For people who are relying entirely on Social Security, none of it is subject to income tax under current law. As I hope you already know, income tax on Social Security benefits phases in after people reach certain income levels. For instance, a married couple can have $3,000 per month in Social Security benefits and $2,000 per month in retirement or investment income, and none of their Social Security benefits or other income will be taxed. My family's economic situation is better than most, so our Social Security benefits are included in taxable income. I don't think that this is at all unfair, as one way of looking at it is that the tax is on the investment growth of the Social Security tax we have paid to the federal government over our working years. Why should this growth not be taxed in the same way that my other retirement income is taxed? If you take Social Security out of taxable income, I'll get a tax cut that will make no difference in my daily life. I understand that the tax cut for people like me will cost the state about $500 million per year and more going forward. If that tax cut means that the state does not have the money to continue current programs in the future because of inflation or because of a recession or because of other things that affect the revenue of the state, I'm going to be mad. I'll be really mad if you do a big tax cut that only helps people like myself, and then don't put money into things that I think are important, like healthcare costs or education for my grandchildren, and which also reduces my property taxes, affects my property taxes, or local government aid, which administers many programs that we need, or the many environmental issues that we face. So I ask you seriously to consider not taxing Social Security benefits in the way that this bill presents. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone else who wants to testify only on the Social Security part? Welcome to the committee. If you would state your name, please. We pleased to hear your testimony.
Okay.
And again, I'm going to ask you to be very brief since
Okay.
these are extras.
Chair Rest and members of the committee, my name is James Nicolai. I'm here really to oppose this legislation. I appreciate the sentiment. I've heard people say we take care of our seniors, but I don't think the math works on this bill. And you've had a lot of testimony to that effect. For example, I pay no tax on my Social Security because I worked in a field of childcare for 45 years and don't earn enough now to pay Social Security tax. I talked with some friends who have higher income jobs and how they might use the windfall, and they said they were going to add to their grandchildren's college fund and buy comfort seats while traveling. We have many problems here in the state taking care of lower income folks and children. And we need to be about that as a primary way to spend this surplus. In many ways, if you really want to take care of seniors like me, pass the paid family and medical leave bill, and my children and grandchildren who would then have some opportunity to participate in my care as I sink into the Parkinson's diagnosis that I have. So I think we need to do the math and invest in care for our youngest children and seniors who have no other options. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see, I'm looking at the clock. I do want to give a full hour to the second part of it, but are there a few comments from members or questions before we move on to that testimony? I have one question for Mr. Munn. One of the testifiers mentioned that about indexing. We know that that's done at the state level. Is that also done at the federal level with regard to the taxability of Social Security income?
Madam Chair, I believe it is, but I will double check right now.
I think it is. So just want to make sure that there's so much information, disinformation, misinformation about this area. Just a comment and conversation that we had at the end of the Thursday hearing, what we really discovered that someone's relationship to Social Security and their Social Security income and benefits is extremely individualized. You cannot predict from one person to another just how the complexity of the laws with regarding Social Security affects all of us in the same way. It just simply doesn't. That's how complicated it is. So it's important to, as we have heard this morning, the different impacts that it has on, these laws have on those who are eligible and receive Social Security and those who don't. And I think we need just a reminder to keep that in mind, that it is not one size fits all. It's one size hardly fits anybody. You have to really look at your own situation, and that's how we receive testimony here. So we'll move on to the pensions portions, and I will invite Mr. Lockesmo and Mr. Johnson to come forward.
Brian Peters is up sick, but Reva Bowe is testifying.
Welcome to the committee. Mr. Lockesmo, if you would identify yourself, please, for the record.
Good morning, Chairman Rest and committee members. My name is Brian Lockesmo, and I'm here representing Minnesota Municipal Retirement Association. I'm their vice president. Our concern is mostly for our basic plan members who worked for many of them, most of them, for more than 30 years under the basic plan, for which they paid a higher contribution rate to their pension and were not covered by Social Security. Thus, their para pension is their primary source of retirement income. In addition to that being the case on their pension, the COLAs for that for the past 10 or 12 years of 1 to 1.5% have not kept up with inflation, and this leaves an inequity for this group of several thousand people. In the event you exempt Social Security from state taxes, it would only be equitable if you also exempt some portion of these basic pension, people receiving a basic pension from the state, from state taxes. It would also be helpful to this group of retirees if improvements could be made to their COLAs to maintain the value of their state pension as is called for in the pension guidelines. This is especially true today with Social Security retirees receiving 5.9 and 8.7% the last couple of years, and inflation continued to operate at a fairly high rate, thus further eroding their pensions, and it's often the only pension they have. Thank you very much for your consideration. And
Thank you, Mr. Lockesmo. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dave Johnson, and I also work with the MMRA. As Mr. Lockesmo said, we're basically, MMRA is about 2,500 members of the former Minneapolis Employees Retirement Fund. They're all basic plan members, which means that their pensions were not coordinated with Social Security. That this benefit is their primary or main source of income security and retirement, and that they made higher contribution rates to make up for the fact that they were not allowed to participate in Social Security or were not eligible to participate in Social Security. You know, our ask would be to be treated equitably to the extent you provide, if the legislature decides to provide some kind of subtraction for Social Security benefits, that basic plan members be treated equitably for that portion of their basic plan benefit that represents a Social Security offset. I would also just say that already basic plan members have been treated not as favorably as coordinated plan members with respect to COLAs. Over the last decade, basic plan members, COLA has been 1%, except for the last 2 or 3 years when it's been 1.5%. In contrast, Social Security COLAs in the last 2 years were 5.9% and 8.7%. The Pension Commission did a study on COLAs about 2 years ago now, I believe, and they expressly identified in this study that basic plan members do not have the hedge of Social Security to protect their pensions from eroding. So they are eroding at a faster rate because they are not getting Social Security COLAs. Again, from our perspective, if you are going to do something with respect to Social Security subtraction, it seems that should be factored in with basic plan members, and they be treated equitably on the tax side. So with that, happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I will stop for a brief moment.
Can you hear me now?
Senator Nelson, do you have a question?
Oh, just a brief comment, which is a question, I guess. I think it would be, your testimony was so important in that it touched on a number of the variables that we don't quite understand, or that at least I would like to get more information on. And it maybe not right now, Madam Chair, but I think it would be helpful to know about the difference between the basic plan and the coordinated plan. Sure. Who was able to participate? Were they not allowed to participate? The history of the COLA, all those things that I think would really be beneficial as we go forward with this, Madam Chair.
Senator Nelson, we are not done with this topic on either parts of this. I think either parts of this bill, what we don't have is, particularly before the tax committee, a lot of understanding of those plans and pension plans. I don't know if anybody on this panel here has served on the pension commission and gone through all of that. I did one term on it early on, and it made my head spin. So, and I love the intricacies of tax policy, but pension policy is way up in the ether as far as I'm concerned. So we have plenty of time to get as much information to make good decisions as possible, and I'm going to allow that to happen. Perhaps later on, another hearing just on the general idea rather than ideas, rather than the bill itself. Senator Putnam.
Madam Chair, if I may, Mr. Johnson says he could provide some light if he has another moment.
Just briefly, because I know we have a number of other testifiers, but I think the basic distinction between a basic and a coordinated member is a coordinated member's benefit is coordinated with Social Security. Basic plan members, that's their sole benefit, and they were ineligible to participate primarily because of when they were hired. But I know Mr. Rice can speak to police and fire, but at least for our members, it was a function of when they were hired and what
Mr.
pension
Johnson,
fund they were in.
What was the rationale given at the time when those folks in those plans were not allowed, forbidden to, or chose not to support or to be part of paying Social Security on their income? Was that state law, federal law? How did that come about?
Part of it was state law with respect to our members. I think it's different for different members, and as I think Mr. Rice and others will testify, police and fire is still basic.
We'll wait to hear some
but ours
information
was state
from
law.
them.
So
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, committee.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brian Rice and Scott Vadnais. So, Mr. Rice, was it 78 or pre-69s?
It was both.
So we were both right.
Correct. If I could introduce myself, Madam Chair,
I
Brian
had to get that in
Rice.
first.
Thank you.
Forget.
Madam Chair, Brian Rice representing the Minnesota Professional Firefighters and the Minnesota Police Fraternal Association, and you'll hear testimony from members of both of those groups. I'm an attorney in Minneapolis with Rice, Walther, and Mosley, and thank you very much for the opportunity to testify in this room 15. The decisions this committee is going to make about this issue is going to have great significance for the overall budget of the state and everything that flows from that. And I did want to thank you, Madam Chair, especially for the great honor you conferred on Senator Putnam by arranging that his bill would be titled Senate File 15. The question that you asked, Senator Nelson, is very important. I have a yellow sheet that maybe gives some quick facts on it about why these basic plan members that we call, and this is really an entirely separate portion of the tax bill than the Social Security issue. We've had public pensions in Minnesota since the 1870s. They predated Social Security by 60 years. So we've had police and fire plans in the major cities throughout the state, and they were not in Social Security because they predated Social Security. You heard from Mr. Johnson, the Minneapolis Employees Retirement Fund was established, I believe, in 1909 or the early 20th century, well before Social Security. It was up and running for 30 years before then. They were not in Social Security, and you'll hear from two first-class city teacher funds, Minneapolis and St. Paul, that were the pre-78 plans that were outside of Social Security because they were created before Social Security, and the state of Minnesota was given the option of whether or not to fold those people into Social Security, and you, the legislature, said, no, you're going to stay separate. And there was the TRA plan, Madam Chair, which you were correct on. It was pre-69 for TRA, all the cities other than Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. And the teachers in Minneapolis were closed to new members as of July 1, 78, as with St. Paul, as with the MRF employees closed at the same time. But even today, on this yellow sheet, you'll see the PERA, Police and Fire Plan, is still separate and apart. If you get hired today as a police and firefighter, you are not in Social Security. You'll hear me say that a million times about police and fire. They are not in Social Security, and that has enormous implications for this tax committee and for those retirees. And roughly, the cohort that we're talking about today of state retirees, based on the actuary reports from June 30th of last year, is 23,493 members, scattered across about 12,000 in police and fire, about 6,100 in para-basic, not only the MRF employees, which is about 2,500, as Mr. Johnson said, but another 3,700 from other people who just years and years ago were working. We have 1,500 St. Paul teachers. You've got 1,000 state troopers that are in the system, and they're really greatly affected by this. They are not being treated like Social Security. There is no subtraction for these people. They're, quite frankly, being treated shabbily, poorly, greatly disadvantaged. They are getting taxed on their pensions, which is their basic retirement coverage. They don't have Social Security. They have the state pensions that you give them, and then you're taxing them in their retirement. In fact, I grabbed this bill. 6 years ago, almost to the date, Senator Dietzick introduced Senate File 1193 with co-authors of Senator Miller and Senator Rest to deal with this issue. So we've been here 6 years saying, give these 23,000 retired government workers the same subtraction you've already given the Social Security people. And you haven't done that. It's a very, very complicated issue. But it really needs to be addressed, because why? Up until 2000, Social Security was going up about 1%. Inflation was not much. In 2020, inflation went up 1.23%. What's happened in the last 2 years? 7% and 7.1 on annual basis. What's happened to Social Security? They adjust at a different period of time. They adjust based on August numbers, 5.9 and 8.7. You know what these police and fire people got the last 2 years for us increase? 1%. They've lost a substantial portion of their retirement income to inflation, and they're going to lose more. This inflation is not stopped. Hopefully it's going to abate, but it's killing them, quite frankly. And we desperately need the legislature's help to at least get us on the same track as these Social Security members. I know I'm going over, but to add more to the complexity, you've got two other handouts that you're going to hear about. One is called the windfall elimination provision, which affects these state workers, these police officers, these retired firefighters, where windfall elimination itself was a name that goes back to the Reagan era, where they said, oh, these public employees have great pensions, so we're going to eliminate their benefits. You're going to hear about people whose spouses die who had Social Security, and guess what? If you're one of these government workers, you don't get their Social Security. And if you happen to earn Social Security somewhere else in your career, guess what? We're going to cut you. just because that's the way the federal government works. You're also going to hear about the government pension offset. Mr. Ryan talked about the federal employees. They're affected the same way. They had pensions before there was Social Security too. They were excluded, not because they chose to. It was the wisdom of the government. It was the wisdom of the Pension Commission to say you don't get it. And now, as Social Security people got a great increase just this month, 8.7%. These police and fire people won. And not only you can say, oh, the rich chiefs. No. We have about 1,000 members in the Police Fraternal Association. About a third of them are widows, and their average pension is about $35,000. Because guess what? Women get these pensions, by and large. They outlive the men. They outlive them significantly. What they have left is and many of them didn't work. At that cohort of women in their 70s, 80s, even in the 90s, many of them were stay-at-home moms or they limited Social Security, and you're going to hear from people like that. So it is exceedingly complex. We've heard testimony from other people, even a government worker. You've got to focus on this thing of the teachers that were coordinated with Social Security, that's a whole different thing. We're talking about these 23,000 basic retirees, and there's still about, when you add up the active workers in the state, there's about 11,000 police and fire in para. There's another about 1,000 in the troopers plan. It's just not the troopers, as you'll hear from Mike Ledoux, the president. It's BC agents, these are your employees too. These are the people you send out 24/7 to take care of people. It's the middle of the night, you make a phone call, you're going to get a firefighter or a police officer, and really, 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 the way the state tax code treats these retirees is, I would say, almost shameful, honestly. I'm mindful of my words in this room, but it's just wrong. Senator Dietzich had the bill for several years. Senator Rest took it over. Senator Miller was on the bill. It did get some attention, and I think what brought it up is last year you talked about a Social Security exemption, which I think has some merit to it. I'm not speaking on that issue. But the fact is that when you left these basic plan members out of that equation, it's just stunning. And a year ago, inflation was up, the Social Security was 5.9. This inflation isn't ending anytime soon. And I saw people, I had two aunts, Helen and Franny, really they were my grand-aunts. They worked for the MRF system. One was the secretary to the Civil Service Commission. One was the secretary to the Public Works Commission. They worked from about 1920 to 1965. They both retired. They played by the rules. They thought they had a great pension. What happened? Inflation. The inflation of the 70s literally wiped them out. They didn't have Social Security. They didn't have the protection that President Nixon and Congress put into Social Security in the early 70s. And the legislature didn't catch up with that, and we do have a huge problem, Madam Chair. You were on the Pension Commission. Senator Dibble was on the Pension Commission for a term. It's exceedingly complex, but we've got to fix this problem. We have a parallel work going on. Minnesota's done pensions on the cheap. We're 46th in the nation on spending per capita on pensions. It's the best deal that the government gets. But this is an issue that this tax committee could really help us with, and it's desperately, desperately needed. I'm sorry for going over.
It's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. I allowed that because we need a whole lot more information. And you mentioned the 1% COLA for the basic plan. Those folks are, when they reach 65, they are covered by Medicare. Is that correct?
Madam Chair,
Or
yes,
they may be. They're
for the most part. That's if they buy into it. You'll hear a widow police officer explain that.
The point I wanted to make is we're hearing from Social Security recipients that although they got this big increase, they also got increases in the cost of their Medicare coverage. So imagine 1% increase and the same percentage of increase on the Medicare cost. So,
Madam Chair, right, Lucinda Silvas.
You can perhaps hear the bias in my comment, but I do think we need to understand that. Senator Klein, did you have a question?
you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rice, for that passionate historical lesson in how we've treated these pensioners. Can you speak, though, or maybe your future testifiers are going to do so, to the merits or your support or opposition of the bill before the committee today and how it addresses the concerns that you've raised?
Madam Chair, I will.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're here today on the second provision in the bill about the pension subtraction, which is the subtraction you gave to the Social Security people a number of years ago. We feel that this cohort of public workers with the state and the federal people should be given that same subtraction, and we also feel that whatever this committee fashions on Social Security, you should do the same for this group. We haven't fully explored it, but we do think that there's some relief that's appropriate for this group of people, particularly what seniors are facing. Did that answer your question, Senator Klein?
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rice. You're very, very passionate for your people, for sure. But, Mr. Rice, can you tell me, I think they're included in the bill. Are we missing anything in the bill?
Mr. Rice.
Madam Chair, Senator Drazkowski, yes, you are. And what you are missing is you're fully exempting all Social Security. That's the earlier section of the bill. We're very grateful that the subtraction issue is brought forward, but that exemption for Social Security is not a full exemption for these state workers. And yes, so the answer is it does not go as you're not treating these public employees, once again, the same as you would treat all the Social Security members.
Senator Drazkowski.
I look forward to learning more. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rice.
We're going to move on to the other testifiers. Mr. Rice, if that's okay?
If I could make one point,
else to add?
because you've had a big number. This pension subtraction will cost $40 million according to the fiscal note. And what I would point out, when this bill was introduced by Senator Rest last year, that number was higher, and you might ask why. Well, this cohort is dying off.
Right.
I mean, they're older. They're the MRF people. They aren't making any new MRF people that are active workers, and they're not making any new pre-78 teachers or pre-69 teachers. You will have Exhibit A, which Ms. Sundin is one of those. Louise is one of the pre-78 teachers. She might even be pre-69, but in Minneapolis, she's pre-78.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Munn, on the revenue estimate, there is an interaction between the two provisions amounting to some $2 million a year. Could you explain that, please, why that's there?
Madam Chair, yes, I had a note in the revenue estimate that explained this fairly well. I just need to find it. There are certain workers who are in the public pension plans that are excluded from Social Security. And I'm not.
I wonder if the note is on page, what would that be, page 4 of the second to last bullet point. You can explain it there.
Right, yes, so since some of the payers would qualify for both, there would be that's the reason for the interaction, but I'm afraid I can't, explain it in much more depth than what's here in the note.
Thank you. Ms. Bayers, would you be able to do that for us? Senator Putnam, if you could stand back for a minute. And members, we're looking particularly at the third line on page 1, the interaction between those that might get Social Security and those that would qualify under this, under the pension provision. That interaction causes $2 million less, if you will, in relief. Just explain, if you will, the that bullet point on page 4, how that works.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Joanna Bears. I'm the Legislative Director for the Minnesota Department of Revenue. As Mr. Mum said, there is an interaction. You know, to be clear, I'll have to go back and talk to our tax research folks just to make sure I'm clear on what the kind of the third bullet on the 4th page is discussing, and I can get back to this committee.
Okay, as I understand it, it's if you get both, there are some limits of what you can receive. There's a higher limit based on the incomes from both sources that the government, again, does not allow you to have the full benefit of both if you're eligible for both. And I'm sure there is some rationale that is provided. It seems to me to be pushing it a bit to call it double dipping, but that's how it's sometimes described. So just want to make sure as we're talking about the pension part of this, how we got there. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Vadnais. We're pleased to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Scott Vadnais. I'm president of the Minnesota Professional Firefighters. We're a union of over 2,000 full-time firefighters in 46 communities in every area of the state, greater Minnesota, suburban Minnesota, and the core cities. I'm appearing today to support Senator Putnam's Senate File 15, specifically the provision that deals with pension subtraction for public employees. As you have already heard, firefighters are not, and I repeat, are not covered by Social Security for their employment as firefighters. As such, any pension benefits we get are solely dependent on you, the Minnesota legislature. Our organization's top 2 issues this year are fixing the Minnesota pension system and getting fair tax treatment for our retirees. Currently, Minnesota does pensions on the cheap. Our employees are contributing over 11% of their salary to their pension and are having to work 20 years to get fully vested in the system. No other employee makes this level of contribution or has to wait as long for their full benefit. While we are paying for more than our fair share towards the pension contributions, our employers are paying far less. Minnesota ranks 46 in the nation on pension spending per capita. The state and its citizens are getting a great value from our benefits. We are there for you 24/7 and in every weather condition imaginable. I might add that it is getting harder and harder to recruit and retain firefighters. And when you add our benefit package up along with our the unfair manner in which we have been taxed, it is simply wrong. We will work with the Pension Commission to fix this. Our second priority is Senator Putnam's bill. What I have to tell this committee is this: after working a full career as an active firefighter in the fire service of our in the service of our fellow Minnesotans, under terms which, in our members' view, are exceedingly unfair, we have the great privilege of then paying taxes when we are retired to a system that does not recognize our worth to all of you. Let me explain. For years, the state has allowed Social Security subtraction for a vast majority of Minnesotan retirees. And yet you have not extended this subtraction for our firefighters, police officers, and other basic plan employees. Senator Dziedzic has carried this bill for 6 years now. We are grateful that it is finally being heard today. Even granting us this pension subtraction will only bring us up to where you treat Social Security recipients now. Our COLA for the pension system is 1%. For the last 2 years, our retired members, approximately 2,000 individuals, and surviving spouses have received a grand total of 2% COLA increases, while other workers in other sectors, including most public employees, have received Social Security increases of 14%. This is simply wrong. On behalf of our 2,000 members and 46 locals throughout the state, we plead with you, at a minimum, enact a public pension subtraction for our members and other basic plan employees. And in the event you deem necessary to extend this benefit to other workers through Social Security tax exemption, you provide an equivalent benefit for our members.
Thank you, Mr. Vadnez. Scott Ledoux and Ms. Sundin, Louise Sundin. And I'm going to ask you to be very brief and, if possible, not to repeat points that have been made by other testifiers. I do understand also that Mr. Lee on Zoom has joined us, and we will go back to him at the end of the testifiers that we have. So again, if you'd be brief, we would appreciate that very much. Ms. Ledoux, Mr. Ledoux.
Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Mike Ledoux. I've had the honor and privilege of being a state trooper for 28 years. I am the president of the Minnesota State Patrol Troopers Association and testified today in that role. I am the current chair of the Minnesota Law Enforcement Association as well and represent all non-sworn supervisory law enforcement officers during collective bargaining. I am also the elected State Patrol Retirement Plan representative on the MSRS Board of Directors. I want to thank Senator Putnam for authoring SF-15 and his advocacy for all basic plan members not covered by Social Security. Unlike when I began my career, we have far more job openings statewide than applicants to fill them. In Minnesota, law enforcement officers are retiring and leaving the profession at unprecedented levels. To be successful, these agencies need the talent, tools, and training to prepare the next generation of officers. If passed, this bill will immediately help recruit and retain officers. This bill encourages officers to remain with the respective agencies until they reach full retirement age, allowing them to train the next generation of law enforcement officers. This bill also encourages retirees to remain in the communities they served and provides the obvious economic benefits of this residency. Current members of the police and fire positions still do not receive Social Security, and state law enforcement officers must mandatorily retire at age 60. Members who do have Social Security earnings from other jobs face significant offsets, such as the windfall elimination provision and then the government pension offset. I could go into greater detail, but I believe the IRS document speaks for itself. In May of 21, the LCPR submitted a study of post-retirement COLAs to the legislature. The State Patrol Plan and the Police and Fire Plans have had their COLAs frozen at 1% since 2014. Because of these factors, the report indicated these plans were the most vulnerable of the statewide plans for the loss of purchasing power due to inflation because of that lack of coordination with Social Security. This bill provides a recruitment incentive for individuals to enter these inherently dangerous professions by providing a tax benefit in retirement. In 2016, a similar pension tax exemption was provided to 18,000 Minnesotans who receive military pensions. This benefit should be extended to those that wear uniforms for community as well as country. These public safety professionals put service before self each day for the security, benefit, and protection of the citizens of the state of Minnesota. Please recognize their service by supporting the public pension subtraction. And Madam Chair, I do have a document that tells the history of the P&F fund in relation to Social Security that was created by the excellent staff at the Pension Commission that I can share in PDF format that will give a little history on that. And of course, I'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ledoux. Ms. Sundin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm pleased to be here today representing the Committee of 13. That's 5,000 teacher and administrator retirees and 3,000 active educators in Minneapolis. I always start with a reminder that we educators are still, to this day, 75% women in our profession, and an unusually high number of single women heads of household like me. That means we have few options to rely on in retirement except ourselves and our pension. And to Peggy from Hermantown that we heard from, I drive a 2002 Saturn station wagon. I love it. In the category of basic pension fund members, that means that we started teaching, and in my case, prior to both the 1969 and the 1978 changes. As a basic MTRFA member, I really kind of do dislike being called basic, but that's it. We contributed 10% of our salary, and we were told that we'd be just fine. And then it was our only choice, Senator Nelson. There was no other choice. Even when there was another choice, we were advised not to take it. But that's another story. We were advised to prepare for retirement with a three-legged stool, our basic teacher pension, moonlighting to get Social Security, and our savings in a 403B or a 457 plan, which now, if you've looked at any of those quarterly records, look like a ski slope in Lake Superior. Then we realized that without Social Security, we wouldn't qualify for Medicare. So we asked Martin Sabo for help, which he did. After that, we could voluntarily contribute 4% towards qualifying for Medicare, which most did. That's 14% we were contributing. That's twice what active teachers are contributing now. When I went to sign up for Social Security, I was feeling pretty good because I had contributed quite a bit to Social Security, working for the union for 22 years, and I had a small business designing and decorating store windows. This was in addition to my 39 years of teaching English to 14 and 15-year-olds in ninth grade classrooms. However, when I filled out the paperwork at the Social Security office, the young man showed my application to a colleague, and she said, "Oh yeah, she's one of those." That didn't feel very good, but she told him that he needed to reduce my Social Security amount that I would receive by the amount of my teacher pension. Therefore, I qualified for basically, that word again, a minimum Social Security. A lot less than I had expected, so I went out of there kind of bummed. The second group of our colleagues may be illustrated by a good friend, a retired high school media specialist, whose husband was a teacher also and a football coach at Minneapolis Central. And until his death, he was a line judge for the Vikings. So he moonlighted from the very beginning of Vikings coming to Minnesota. When he died, my friend got 0 of his Social Security because they were both basic members. And so nothing. Another good friend, Sandy, lost her husband in November of this past year, and she was a 50-year, get it, 50-year elementary teacher, but she did not receive his Social Security because she is and was a basic member. Of the 5,000 retirees that I represent, exactly half of them, 2,640 from your yellow chart, do not receive the Social Security benefits they earned and contributed to by working outside their classrooms. We are part of the 25,000 Minnesota public employees who have served or are serving Minnesota families and communities in every district, including every one of yours. Call it old math or new math, we're all in the same penalty pickle in that group. And by the way, we don't escape Minnesota when we retire. We have the highest percentage of retirees who stay in Minnesota and stay in your communities and keep them vital. So here I am today, teetering on my two-legged stool, asking only for the same subtraction language that's currently in law for Social Security recipients, but not for us basic plan members. Senate File 15 will not fix the major inequities we suffer, but it will catch the basic plan members up with retirees who have Social Security. Nothing more, nothing less. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee for coming together to tackle this issue. Even though it's a modest commitment, it moves us a little towards basic fairness for our basic retirees. And that incidentally includes both my folks who were Minneapolis teachers, both basic member teachers. When my mother died, my dad didn't get her Social Security either. So it's very close to me, but it's one small step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sundin. Next, we have Jean Washbush and Lucinda Silvas. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Washbush.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, I am Gene Washbush, a retired basic plan member of St. Paul Teacher Retirement Fund, and I worked for 40 years in St. Paul schools. I am speaking on behalf of the approximate 1,500 members, retired members, who are basic teachers in St. Paul. And these members now are all 67 years of age or older. None of them are currently employed as teachers. They're all retirees. The basic plan members, as you heard several times, are those members who were employed before July 1 of 1978. There was no option for Social Security at that time. After that, all our members became coordinated with Social Security. But these members are the older, senior people who are been retired for quite a number of years. The Senate File 15 gives a tax break to all retirees in Minnesota who receive a normal Social Security benefit. This, is accomplished, of course, by reducing their annual taxable income. There is, what's needed, as you've been hearing, is some similar type of relief for the basic plan members of our plan and, of course, all the basic plans in the state of Minnesota. You remember that those are the older retirees who do have and earned a pension, but because of the time when they retired, their final average salary, for instance, was lower. Therefore, their pension benefits started out, as good at the time, but over the years, inflation has reduced the purchasing power of these more senior members. And so they are the ones we're concerned about, at least I'm concerned about. I don't believe the board or anyone else of St. Paul Schools has taken a position on this. And Social Security does have increases, as you've heard, that are keeping up with the cost of living. That's how they're based. The St. Paul teachers have been getting 1% increases over the last few years, which is not keeping up with inflation at all. Just a final comment, trying to keep this brief because I know you've heard a lot of information today. I looked up to see what the increases have been for various items in the country. And since the year 2000, home heating has gone up 348%. Prescription drugs are up 285%. Medicare Part B premiums have increased 274% since 2000. Homeowners insurance is up 163%, and even a pound of bacon is up 162% since 2000. So things have not gotten cheaper. Our members do need some relief, if at all possible. This might be an opportunity for the legislature to provide at least a little bit of reducing their expenses through reducing their taxes. And thank you for your attention to me and to the issue at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Washbush. Ms. Silvas.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll be relatively brief. My name is Lucinda Silvas. I'm a Minnesota resident and a member of the Minnesota Police Fraternal Association. I have 4 children, 7 grandchildren, but I'm here today as a police widow. I was married to a Minneapolis police officer for 40 years until his death on Father's Day 2017, sudden cardiac arrest. My husband was a police officer from 1968 to 1999. He was in the old Minneapolis police pension and didn't pay into Social Security for that job, but he had far more than the required 40 quarters of Social Security from his military service and many jobs that he worked before, during, and after his time as a police officer. But because of this windfall pension deduction, his Social Security benefit was reduced. After they deducted the payment for Medicare, I knew it was not very much, but I actually went and looked it up for you. His Social Security benefit was $89.20 a month for all of that work that he did. Now, I was not as hardworking as my husband because I never got my 40 quarters in to Social Security. So I don't get Social Security in my own name. I get no Social Security. I don't get any of that $89.20. I do receive Medicare as his surviving spouse, but because I get no Social Security benefit for them to take it out of, I have to write a check every month to CMS Medicare to cover my Medicare premium. And it has been mentioned by other people, my husband's pension cost of living increase this year is again 1%, and Social Security is 8.7%. So city employees did pay into their pension while they were working, much like Social Security recipients did. And I just hope that if you pass this bill, you include those pensions in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Silvas. Lauren Eckhart and Brian Peters.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Lauren Eckhart. I live in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and have lived there pretty much all my life, except for the years I spent in the military service in the early 1970s. I was honorably discharged and used the GI Bill to pay for my tuition at Mankato State College, where I majored in law enforcement and earned my Bachelor of Science degree there. Upon graduation, I was hired as a deputy sheriff on the Faribault County Sheriff's Department in 1975. I remained there full-time until I retired in year 2000, which put me at 25 years. Before my retirement, I spoke with 2 different PERA representatives about the fact that I was considering retiring at age 50 and about the 25% reduction from the usual 100% pay at age 55. One of the persons I spoke to at PERA said that I could retire at age 50, and with the yearly increases of approximately 5% a year at that time, I would receive in 5 years would put me at the 100%, and that would have been at year 2005. Another PERA representative that I said that I would not be getting the 8, 9, or 10% that had been being paid out in recent years, but that mine would be at 7% for the next several years. I believed the PER people that I spoke with. I believe they were professionals and were accurate in what they were telling me, and I firmly believed in what they said and had absolutely no doubt in what I was being told about the yearly increases that I could expect. I pretty much bet my financial life on what I was told. After the 18-month waiting period for the full year increase, I was pretty disappointed when all it amounted to was less than 1%. I think it was like about 3/4 of 1%. I tried to be optimistic about PERA, that this was just a temporary problem, that PERA people would be able to regain and improve their financial situation and come around to the 5 to 7% a year increase that I was told that I'd be getting. I continued with an optimistic hopefulness in the next several years but it has not improved. Last year, my income from PERA after taxes was a little over $32,000 a year. I feel like this current level of PERA income at this rate is pushing me further down, closer toward a poverty level. I feel that that just isn't right, and I would appreciate every little thing that could be done to help out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, please, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am not Brian Peters. I am Reed LeBeau on behalf of
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Peters.
of course you were.
Who's under the weather this
I
morning.
knew that. Apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. On behalf of the MPPOA and its 10,000-plus members, I'm testifying in support of Senate File 15. At the outset, we want to thank Senator Putnam for bringing this bill forward, as well as Senators Housechild, Klein, Westland, and Nelson for also signing on to the bill. Section 2 of the bill will provide benefits to both our state patrol members as well as our para, police, and fire pensioners. Senate File 15 will provide the same tax advantage to members of law enforcement and their survivors that Social Security recipients will enjoy. In short, this will give us parity to those that would be receiving the Social Security benefit under the proposed bill. We thank you very much for bringing this forward. We appreciate your support and ask that the committee would act favorably upon it. And I'd be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability should you have them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, my apology for not reading the list correctly. We're going to turn now to Mr. Lee, who is testifying from Kansas and wanted to speak about both sections of this bill. Mr. Lee, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if you would identify yourself, please, for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the committee members. My name is John Lee from Tax Sample Center in Kansas. We are tax research and economics professor with 15 tax simplification publications. We support SF-15 concept for seniors. Minnesota has about 900,000 seniors. For Social Security and pension benefit subtractions, this bill and the existing bill have 4 problems. There is a tax cliff problem. That means even $1 difference in some point can cause $100 tax difference unfairly. Number 2, this bill will reduce tax revenue. It is a challenge to find a tax revenue source or to cut Minnesota budget. Number 3, for Social Security or pension such as 10,000, for low income like 20,000 or high income 1 million, they rate at 50% or 1%, that's totally different, which need to be reasonable to cover basic living expenses. They need to be treated differently. Number 4, low incomers with Social Security and pension still need spend time to calculate their income tax, which also involved the more time and cost for them and for Department of Revenue to process. We have one simple suggestion: to use a simple linear formula to resolve the pension and the Social Security the problems. For detail, number 1, to let low income to have full pension and Social Security and other retirement income subtractions. That means the tax to 0. Also, help Department of Revenue to process much less tax returns to save the time and the cost. Number 2, for one linear formula we used to simplify the tax status, for example, is with the easy number. For example, for Two, for the married joint returns. One for married filing separately. 1.5 for other taxpayers. Also, number three, to combine all retirement incomes together instead to treat the Social Security benefit, pension benefit differently. Number four is to have neutral or less tax revenue change with this reform as possible. So the key is not a yes or no. And the key is how we to do Social Security and the pension tax. Also, we will present a research paper about the senior tax sample return, simplification in a professional conference next month. So all look like, you mentioned lots of problems. I think it can be resolved with one simple linear formula. Let us know your questions and let us work together for Minnesota. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. We are pleased that you joined us. That completes the testimony. Senate File 15 is laid over, but I'm going to ask before we adjourn if Senator Putnam has any final comments, or I guess and anybody else as well. But Senator, well, first of all, is there anyone at the table that wants to make a comment before I call on Senator Putnam to end our session? Okay, thank you very much members for your attention. Again, this is both of these items are very complicated situations, again, individually for Minnesotans. And we have some opportunities here, and we'll be working on the ways in which we can take advantage of them. Senator Putnam, final comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to take the opportunity also to thank our co-authors and everyone else who has worked on this issue in the past. We'd be remiss if we didn't appreciate the work of Senator Rest, Senator Dietzick, Senator Miller on addressing these concerns in past years. But I also want to take a moment to thank Senator Rest in particular for the character with which we've conducted this conversation. Oftentimes, I think you think of politics and it's more about grandstanding than understanding. And I think that, Senator Rest, you've conducted this hearing on this issue, both this week and last week, with the requisite humility to understand that understanding takes work, and it takes vulnerability, and it takes research and thought. And I'm proud to be part of a body and a committee that conducted these hearings in that spirit, and it's thanks to your leadership for that. Now, when I think when you look at this issue, there are two intertwined issues. One is a math problem, and one is a values problem. And the first, when it comes to the math issue, we've acknowledged that the math is complicated, that a lot of our understandings of who gets impacted by these bills, by this bill, is uncertain because we don't really know, and we're making some predictions. But one thing that is true is that the 8.7% increase in inflation, the cost of living adjustment for Social Security is actually going to push more people into higher brackets when it comes to this tax because the tiers under which it's conducted are static. So more people are going to be affected by this than we realize. And when we talk about who actually gets impacted by this, part of the problem is we don't have a very clear definition of what we mean by middle class. We look at the math that we were given by Senate Council, and if you draw the line at 125,000 and under, we're looking at 340,000 tax returns would be impacted by this decision around the Social Security concern. That's a lot of people. And it's true that a lot of those people are not necessarily indigent. That's absolutely true. But what's also true is that these are people who have worked for their whole lives and deserve our consideration. So I want to especially thank Ms. Beaver, Ms. Goodney, and Mr. Nicolai for the concerns that they raised. And they're concerns that I feel too, and I think everyone in this room does. I think if we were granted, given a horrible decision to decide whether we're going to put money into education or take care of our seniors and our pensioners, a lot of us would struggle with that. But we are faced with a historical opportunity for a both and. That's what we face right now. We have the opportunity to make great investments in the social services that our three friends testified about, but we also have the opportunity to show our respect for seniors and pensioners who have worked so hard for so long. The math is tough, but the values are clear. Mike Ledoux, Mr. Ledoux, who testified for us before, worked 29 years as a state trooper. Members, Madam Chair, I don't think any of us could handle 2 weeks in his job. And he did that for 29 years. And still to this day, if we wanted to stay here for another couple hours, we could ask Mr. Rice to come up here and talk about how specifically state troopers are treated so much more poorly than other pensioners in our state. Madam Chair, members, I'd like to draw your attention to one final thing. Something that Mr. Vadnais said. He said this was our opportunity to recognize their worth. Yeah, this is a math problem, but it's about something much bigger than that too. And these two issues are both practically, historically, and ethically inextricable. It's our chance to show our respect for our seniors who have worked so hard and for our pensioners who served us so well. So, Madam Chair, again, I thank you for your time and your attention to this concern, and I'm looking forward to future conversations.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Before we adjourn, I will call members' attention, particularly Senator Nelson and Senator Housechild, to the document that was sent out from Nora Pollock about the requirements for local sales taxes. This is the memo that went out to everyone. They are going to be monitoring those proposals as they come in. They are due, not the bills, but the proposals to be forwarded to Senate Council by January 31st. There being no further business before the committee, we stand adjourned.